Hi guys, I'm Matt Schlicht with Zapchain, and I'm here with Chris Shepard, CEO of HashRabbit.
Hello.
He is an expert at all things Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining can be a super complicated subject, but Chris is going to explain it so that we understand it now. So welcome. Thank you for helping us with the Bitcoin course.
No problem. Hello.
So tell us a little bit about HashRabbit.
So what HashRabbit does is we basically build tools for developers to build on top of Bitcoin mining. So Bitcoin miners have better tools.
Which is awesome. You guys will understand exactly what that means in a second, hopefully.
Yeah.
So I think the first question, and I think a lot of people think about this, is, is Bitcoin secure? Like, should I be using my credit card? Or is Bitcoin somehow better than that? Like, what makes Bitcoin secure?
So the thing that makes Bitcoin so special is that it's basically, one, because it's decentralized, but the thing that makes it decentralized and makes it secure is that there are computers that are solving really hard math problems that allow them to verify transactions without a middleman inside. Like, basically, if I was going to send money to you, I would have to go through a bank, and then somebody at the bank would have to approve it, and then they would be able to give it to you, and then they take a fee. But with Bitcoin, I can send you directly without any kind of interference. But the thing that verifies that is a Bitcoin miner, and those guys are incentivized to verify the transaction for us.
And so the Bitcoin miner is like an actual computer.
Yeah, so Bitcoin, I would say a Bitcoin mining rig is the actual computer, and then the miner, I guess I'm referring to as the person, the owner of the mining rigs.
Right.
So that's how I would. But yeah, so the thing that makes it so secure is that these guys are basically verifying all of these transactions that go through, and to kind of go into a little bit more detail on it, it's we basically, anytime a transaction goes through, I'm incentivized to verify your transaction based on what the fee you provided me. So you can send a 0% fee if you want, or you can add something higher. And depending on what the incentive is, I'm going to go after the one that's probably the most that provided the most amount of fees.
Right.
But as well as I would receive a block reward. So it used to be 50 Bitcoins for every block, and a block is generated every 10 minutes. So in every 10 minutes, a new block is generated with all the transactions that are inside of that block. So in that time, every single time the block is open, you get 25 Bitcoins, as well as the transaction fees that are inside of it. So 1,000 transactions that went through, if maybe 1 Bitcoin in total was the fee, then that gets dispersed to all the different miners for contributing to helping solve that block.
Right. So for Bitcoin, there's Bitcoin, the currency, right? And that's what's being transacted. And then there's Bitcoin, the blockchain, which is kind of the ledger that is keeping track of the transactions. So, how exactly does the blockchain work? And have we ever had something like this before?
So what the blockchain is just a public ledger, which just has all the transactions on it. So essentially, if you had 10 Bitcoin, I had 5 Bitcoin, what we would be able to do is you would take, if I sent you one of those Bitcoin, it would be able to go and it would switch to, I would basically have 6 Bitcoin, you would have 9 Bitcoin, and then what we could do is it would be put on the public ledger every single time. But what happens is that transaction gets put inside, it basically gets piled up together with a bunch of different transactions. But what that blockchain essentially is a system that, the same thing that banks use, where it's just, where they just see transactions going through, but nobody can see it. So this one's just a public ledger, public receipt that everybody can see. And that essentially leads into going into what, every time that a transaction goes through, in a 10-minute span, it gets accumulated inside of what is called a block. And a block is essentially just a really hard mathematical problem that a bunch of these mining rigs, what they do is a bunch of these machines, they're just doing billions of calculations every second, and they're just they're brute forcing the answer, which essentially means I'm just guessing until somebody figures it out.
Right.
So once this block, so that's what a block is, and the block is generated every 10 minutes. And so every time all the transactions get inside of that block, after all those miners figure out the really hard math problem, it opens up the block. There is usually a reward that they will receive for actual Bitcoin, and then there's a reward for transaction fees. Currently, transaction fees are not very much, so a lot of the incentive goes towards the actual block reward. It used to be 50. It halves every 4 years, so it goes to 25, then it's going to go to 12 and a half, then it's going to go, yeah. So what the block, every time a block is opened up, right now, it just starts over with another block again. And so none of the miners can actually solve this. They can't solve the next problem. They always have to solve the current block. So there's no going ahead and there's no going back. Everybody has to do the same math problem, and that makes everything a lot more fair because everybody has to do the same things. But
right.
and it's more of a guessing game, so it becomes a lot more random of who's allowed to or who actually can generate these coins. So eventually when everything diminishes, the transaction fees are probably going to be the primary thing. But currently, that's, I would say, the description of the blockchain. And it's just
right.
a bunch of
transactions about that. So the block is a group of Bitcoin transactions. What happened, and then miners, which are the computers, or the mining rigs, I guess, operated by the miners. They are using their processing power to solve these problems via brute force. Mm-hmm. And then once they solve it, then the block is open and 25 Bitcoins is distributed to everybody that helped solve that?
Right, not automatically, but yeah.
So then what, the transactions that are in that block, what's different about them once the block is solved? What does that mean for the transactions?
Okay. So this is where nodes would come in, but when I want to send you the transaction, what happens is because Bitcoin is public and everybody gets to see it, everybody has the blockchain on their wallet, on their own system. What happens is the first thing that happens is it verifies if our transaction is a real transaction. Is this is someone trying to fake a transaction and do something they're not supposed to? And so what nodes do is they verify the transaction from multiple parties. So there could be somebody in China, there could be somebody 3 miles away, there could be anywhere, and one of the nodes will verify this transaction is real. And it usually is about 8 verifications before it's just okay, this is a valid transaction. This transaction is okay to go inside of a block. And so once it's verified that this is a valid transaction and it's okay for miners to mine it and everything, then that's when it gets accumulated inside of a block. And once the miners actually crack open the block and everything, and then they actually verify the transactions by taking the transaction fees, that's confirming the transaction, and that is officially putting it on the ledger, where it's just this is a real transaction, this happened, it is done, you have my money, I have less money now, and that's...
And the world is a better place. So then nodes, though, how are they different from mining rigs? Is it still a computer? Can I run a node?
You can run a node if you download the Bitcoin Core wallet application on your Mac or Windows or whatever that works with everything. You can host a node by just keeping the app open, but you're not incentivized like a miner to receive a reward for doing it. But you are contributing to helping the network become more secure because there's now more people or more computers verifying that there's all the transactions that are going on in the network are real.
So I can just feel better about myself.
Yeah, that you're contributing.
So are mining rigs, do they also count as nodes?
Mining rigs currently don't count as nodes. And it also depends on what the mining rig is, because a lot of the mining rig. So originally it started as CPU processing, your processor.
Which would be like the same thing that if I wanted to play like a really good video game on my computer, like that's what would power that.
Well, the processor would probably. Let's say this: the processor is the brain of your computer.
Right.
A graphics card is the one who will render all of the graphics and stuff. So when it evolved into graphics cards, that's what you want to use.
That's
for
what I
gaming.
meant.
Yeah. So CPU, GPU, kind of, yeah. But yeah, so originally you could mine with your laptop, and then eventually you could use your graphics card, and then so now you're able to do transactions you'll be able to do guesses way faster than everybody else, and then it eventually evolved into these dedicated chips. They're ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits. They're basically chips that are specifically made just for Bitcoin, nothing else, to hash the algorithm that it's trying to solve the complex math problems. And those guys basically, those guys are innovating more than anything else, because because now it only does one thing instead of a computer processor, that can do a lot of different things. So
Are they a lot better?
they're way, way better. Like, if you look at the chart of the difficulty going up, it's just like, woo.
So that's actually a good point. So people talk about Bitcoin difficulty quite a bit. You should explain exactly what that is.